Welcome to A Case for America. My name is Austin Hepworth, and I am here along with co-host Michael Hepworth, and we wanted to do a introduction to the show, what we're looking at, and what we're thinking with this, as well as an introduction to ourselves. So to get started, just quickly, again, my name is Austin Hepworth. I am a licensed attorney. I practice in Utah and California, and have been involved in law and politics and societal issues now for a fair number of years. And that lens has given me, I think, some background to talk about laws and politics. But in addition, I am one that very actively searches to understand competing sides, to understand why there's conflicts, to understand why those things take place. And it has been a fun journey talking to people, working to understand, to see what it is that drives people in America. I'm not personally a Republican or a Democrat. I'm independent on the vote rolls, and I feel strongly that there's truths, political truths, good truths that exist throughout all political parties. But I also feel there are some errors, some significant errors throughout many political parties. And so the show is not one that will advocate for or against a political party. We're not going to really talk about that. It'll be more, we may talk about, I guess, where a party stands on something, but we really want to drill into what's really happening. What are the principles? What are the right things? Where should we fall on these items? Because the goal is to enable each of you in this to be able to make decisions for yourselves, much like a jury in a case. Again, this is a case for America. Michael and I take on the responsibility of trying to present things as we would, like in the case, put up evidence, put up arguments. But ultimately, it's for the jury to decide, and the jury is you. And we feel very strongly that individuals, when given correct information, good information that's stripped of the bias, stripped of the rhetoric and the emotion, can make very good decisions. And so we certainly believe in people, and we believe in America. We love our country. We love what it represents and what it's done. And ultimately, more than anything, we want to make a case that America is an incredible, blessed nation, that there are principles that we should hold to because they transcend time and they will produce incredible results. And so that will be the underlying argument that we push for, but it is something that we will be with, we'll look at, we'll critique. We won't pretend that everything's beautiful and perfect here. And we want to explore what are the issues, why do they exist, what can we do about them, how do we solve them? And ultimately, our work is part of something bigger that we call Believe in America, which is part of an initiative called Believe, where we work to empower individuals to do good, to be good, and to really help shape the future. And so this is a series of discussions, of information. We'll try and have guests on and do different things to really highlight America, the beauty that's there, the issues that are there, to not shy away from those, but to come back to this place of what is it that makes it great? What is it that creates issues? And what are some ways to potentially solve? And we'll look at those. But we'll let Michael have a moment to introduce himself. He comes from a different perspective, where he's not a lawyer, but he is a data/numbers guy, and really puts an interesting perspective on things as well.
Yeah, thanks, Austin. Yeah, as he mentioned, I have a background in mathematics. I majored in mathematics. I emphasized in statistics in college. By trade, I'm a data architect. I work with data, and I'm always very curious to how data is being used, how it's represented. And you're probably aware there's everybody out there has a data set they like to use to prove their point. That's usually what we go to. Hey, I have this really cool point to make. Here's all my data that proves that I'm right. And so I'm always interested by the amount of information out there and then the amount of counterclaims. One person claims X, one person claims Y, and they both use similar data sets. And so we say, how do we arrive at these disparate conclusions? Things like that really make me curious and really want to dig in to view what they're looking at, how they're interpreting data, how they're gathering data. These are all really interesting questions for me. So I tend to look at a lot of issues today from a data perspective, but more specifically, how do the principles we espouse drive what data we care about? More than just, hey, here's a bunch of data sets and this is how we're going to prove our point. It's usually we're trying to establish principles. And so I like to look at things from what are the principles we're trying to establish, and then how are we trying to use data to make that clear to other people. So that's usually what I'm looking for. Not as I don't have as many insights into the law as Austin does. So we'll kind of bring two different points of view on a lot of these issues, both I think stemming from principles and the importance of those, but then kind of talking legally and then getting into some facts and figures and how we can best understand some of these issues. And like Austin, I too want to be able to make a case for America. I believe in America as a country and as an idea, and how important it's been to the world for creating opportunities for freedom. I think that can continue if we put in the time to really understand the principles behind its founding and understand the principles of what we can do today to continue to make it a great place to live. So thanks, Austin.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I really appreciate that. Something to your point, using data to talk about the underlying principles. One piece that we do want to show to explain where we're coming from, what we see with things. We have this picture here that describes some of what we look at from the song America the Beautiful. Is that what it's called? I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
Second verse it talks towards the end about confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty and law. And those are a few principles that we believe strongly about. We believe that liberty or freedom, I know that some groups use those as having different meanings. I think currently we'll probably use those interchangeably quite a bit, freedom and liberty. There are some differences in meaning, but again, for common understanding currently, just understand that we're talking about the same thing. And what we're talking about when we say freedom or liberty is not a place of anarchy where there's no law. We don't believe in that at all. We don't believe that absence of law creates freedom necessarily, unless we're more towards the tyranny side of things. And this is kind of like a seesaw that shows anarchy means no law. And if you're in an anarchy type state, in order to exist, in order to really reach your potential as an individual, as a community, you need some laws, you need some order, you need some way to interact with each other. But if you go too far, then the laws start to hurt. They start to stifle growth. They start to stifle what can be accomplished. And what we believe about America and the proper role of government is that the purpose of government is to bring society, to bring thousands and millions of humans together at this proper balance point where we're not in anarchy, but we're not in tyranny. And there's all kinds of things that can go on each side of this balance. We'll talk about personal morality, because what we do as individuals, if we want the law to not be necessary for us, we have to have private solutions for things. We have to operate in a certain way to protect our own rights. Rights always entail responsibilities with it for individuals. And those two go hand in hand. So that notion from the song about confirm thy soul in self-control is a very important part of understanding how to have liberty. No government can create liberty if the people aren't willing to live according to a moral code. It's not possible. And I think that a lot of what we'll look at will explore some of that of explore what happens when we as individuals start to shirk responsibility. When we start to claim a right but shirk the responsibility. The two never go hand in hand. There's always conflicts that arise. And then the flip side, liberty and law. Law does, the right amount of law creates liberty. It creates this system that thrives. And this is what we really want to push for in A Case for America, is to really look at some of the things that make America great. When we look at America, it's this place of incredible prosperity. The world's existed for, depending on whether, some people believe a certain number of thousands of years to millions of years. And it's at this last little couple hundred years in history that we've taken off. Technology has advanced incredibly. Prosperity has advanced incredibly. I tell my children all the time, I say, you guys live better than kings. You have a house that's air conditioned, it's heated. You've got running water, you've got hot water, you've got all these things. You want some kind of food, you want Vietnamese food, you want African food, whatever. There's restaurants around that provide those. I can get food from around the world. And how did we get here? And what is it we're doing that may be undermining or throwing off that balance? What are the results of throwing off the balance? These are all things we'll explore, but we'll always come back to this concept pictured here of liberty or freedom being this proper balance. The role of government being to create this proper balance. And if things are properly balanced, our position is that the world is very prosperous. Society is very prosperous. We progress incredibly. And when the balance starts to get it thrown off is when we start to regress and have issues. So that's a little bit about some of what we're looking at. And Michael, curious if you have any examples to point to of some data or numbers or any outside facts talking about America or some of the great things that have happened.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about what you've told your children about how we live like kings today. I was reading in the Laura Ingalls Wilder series. At one point, her family had moved out to some territory that was at the time belonging to the Indians, and they were going to settle out there. And her dad had mentioned how he was so excited because he was going to be able to live like a king, but he'd moved out there with nothing. And so this concept was kind of interesting to me. Today, that's not how we would look at living like a king. His interpretation was, out here, I have everything I need. I have all the food I can get, whether I need to hunt it or whether I need to grow it. I can make my own house. He was looking at the freedom and liberty he had for his family, and he said he was going to live like a king. Whereas today, we look at that as a punishment to have to live that way, to provide for ourselves in such a manner like that. And so times really have changed. And in his book, The Mainspring of Human Progress, Henry Grady Weaver talks about this. He said, why did, for recordable history, some 6,000 years, why were humans only ever concerned with what they're going to eat next? And why were there famines to be found everywhere? And then why in the last, 150, 200 years, there's never been a famine in America? Suddenly, at a time in the world, for an extended period of time, hundreds of years, centuries, no famines to speak of. Whereas that was the way the world worked for some 6,000, 5,000, 6,000 years of recorded history. And so he goes through and talks a lot about the things that we enjoy today. And he wrote his book in the 1970s, and he was talking about the great improvements we've made in technology. And I know Cleon Skousen's talked about the same thing. He talks about how we went from being able to only communicate writing on parchment, maybe writing on metal, to where we can communicate instantly with emails, with telephones, with cell phones, whatever we need. And this all happened in a very relatively short period of time. It wasn't that we were gaining this technology for thousands and thousands of years. It happened relatively overnight in the history of the earth. And so we can ask, what changed in the human experience in the last couple hundred years that made that possible? Today, you can look at things like, just to kind of give you an idea of what America and sometimes the West is experiencing versus what the world used to experience. Today, America is less than 5% of the total world population, but they make up a little over 20% of its total income. So 5% of the people are pulling in over 20% of the world's income. That's been greater in the past. There's other areas of the world that are, I mean, poverty is dying at an incredibly fast rate in the world today. But still, despite that, America still makes up a large percentage of total world income. You look at America's GDP, it's somewhere around 23 trillion in 2021. Next largest was China at 17 trillion. If you make that per capita, though, meaning per person, what is the GDP per person? The US was sitting at about $70,000, and China's not even in the top 10. Canada was next at $51,000 per person GDP. And so there's just massive differences between what America has experienced over the last couple hundred years versus other areas in the world. You can look at the immigrants coming to America, what they experienced from where they came from and what they experience here. And today, immigrants in America have the same median income as people that were born in America. So you move to America, just on average, you have the same median income as people that were born in America. People like to look at things like median income in places like Sweden, which is a little bit higher than America. But if you look at Swedish immigrants in America, their median income is higher than the Swedes who live in Switzerland. And so just moving to America makes them that much better off, the opportunities that they find here. So there's just so many different aspects of what we experience here being so much greater than lots of other places in the world. And so you have to question, was making it that way? Why does it work out that way? Are there any principles we can identify? Are there any habits people have? What makes it so that America has been so prosperous for so long and has kind of spearheaded a lot of the advances that have made life so much better than what it was 200 years ago?
Yeah, and that's something I've often thought about and just thought, where did all this come from? Why did these inventions start? Certainly, there were a few inventions before America. The printing press came around before. Books were a big part of enabling technological progress. But each one of those, the interesting thing to me is, principle-wise, is that we identify the printing press, for example, as one of those points that really started to shape humanity because it could distribute information. But to me, what that was doing is it was starting to unlock the power of the individual. Before in the world was all subject to kings and monarchs and tyranny, essentially, where the king got to choose what the king chose, and you're just along for the ride. And that model kept people mostly repressed. Obviously, there were countries like Rome that rose, that were very enlightened, that had aqueducts, that had quite a bit of things. They had some marvels of engineering. But even then, it was interesting to see, with the fact they had aqueducts and they had some really cool things, it was more putting to use aggressively what existed then, to me, at least the way I see it, as opposed to inventing something new or creating something new. And the level of creativity that came begs the question of, well, where did that come from? Why did we suddenly, why once people could read and people could start to access things and learn things, what did that do? And to me, one of the amazing things about America is when it struck this balance, I believe strongly the Constitution of the United States of America moved the world closer, moved a society closer to that balance than it ever existed before. And when that happened, prosperity started really coming through. It still took a little while for it to trickle through everybody and for the effects of it to fully be felt, and people to kind of break out of the mindset of kings and rulers. Even War of 1812 comes up, which is 40 years almost after the Revolutionary War ends, and we're still at this place of, we're still stuck in this mindset a little bit. And then we get through some of the serious moral issues in America, like slavery. But once we tackle some of those bigger moral issues, And we, in America, prevails, I think, largely starts to move that needle closer, that balance closer. Progress starts to really skyrocket. And to me, what the principle of that is, individual potential is realized and released when humans can exist in the state of proper balance, that state of liberty. And when humans are in a true state of liberty, they thrive. And their ability to think, to create, to do just thrives. And I think that that state cannot be created without law. I think that it can't be created without morality. And even looking at the laws, if we go into an example of one of those laws, a basic law that exists that's fascinating to think about is this right to own property. Where if I, whatever the laws of the land are, if I acquire property and it becomes mine, I have the right to tell the government no. I have the right to tell people no. A king can't just come take it. And when I have the right to acquire things, and even it's interesting to think about this, I don't think that we look at it this way often, but we essentially adopted the notion that the right to this property would justify taking another human's life to defend it. Because if someone came to take it, trespass, burglary, those types of things, for a very long time, we were justified in using deadly force for that. And currently in our society, we frown on that a little bit. And we tell, oh, you shouldn't, take a human life if they're just stealing something or whatnot. But where our property rights came to, and from a moral perspective, the fact that my neighbors don't just come take things, is predicated upon this notion that in America we made the decision that society as a whole will be better off if we allow people to defend their property, even against the loss of life. Because otherwise, people could just walk in, they could just take it. You couldn't do anything about it. But people go to jail. And certainly one of the things we'll explore in this is, well, what happens in places where they stop enforcing property laws? What starts to happen? Really go in depth and look at San Francisco right now and New Jersey. They passed some laws that say that you can't essentially put a criminal record on a teenager. So the teenagers have rights against the cops. The cops aren't enforcing things. And to watch what's starting to happen to the towns, to listen to the city councils and the problems they're having. It's a great way to explore some of this, but as a bedrock principle, America certainly adopted the notion that property rights were important, and they enshrine that throughout their laws and their moral code. And that then enabled people to know with a surety that if they worked to acquire something, it would be theirs. And I think that alone was an incredible motivating factor in unlocking people's ingenuity and their ability to think and create, because they didn't have to fear someone coming and taking what they worked hard to create and do.
Yeah, and it's an interesting moral aspect of it too, where you're given the right to property, you're essentially given the right to responsibility. Because to do anything with your property, you have to put forth some sort of effort and take some sort of responsibility for the land that you have. And so saying you have a right to the property is also simultaneously saying now you have a responsibility to go and do something with it. Because if you just make it so people can live and they don't have to put forth any effort, I'm going to give you everything you need. I'm going to give you the land. I'll give you the labor. I'll give you the seeds. We'll grow the food for you. We'll harvest it and we'll just give it to you. That's not you owning land. That's not you taking care of it and taking responsibility on it. And you mentioned throughout the history of the United States, we've struggled with some of these questions, these moral issues such as slavery. And if you look at in the South in America during the time of slavery, compared economically compared to the North, there were a few very wealthy individuals in the South, large landowners who owned slaves. For the most part, people were very poor in the South, and most of life was taken care of by the wealthier individuals. People didn't have to put forth a lot of effort. In the North, there was just as many wealthy individuals, but there was an actual middle class. A lot of people getting along very well, and they had a lot of rights and had a lot of responsibilities. And economically, the North was just beating up on the South as far as GDP goes and things like that. And it's mainly due to people having the ability to go out and do something. They've taken some responsibility. They've gone and done something with it. They've improved their own lives instead of just having to sit around and everything's kind of given to me. I don't have to do much for it. There's a lot of stagnation. And so, morally speaking, having the right to property creates this good incentive for people to do something.
Yeah, and it's a good point. So we do like to talk about the responsibilities. So if we have a right to property, then it does imply I have a responsibility to do something with it, to make something of it. And in that respect, America for a very long time would say, hey, if you want food, you got to go work for it. That's certainly a societal trend that we're seeing challenged right now. People really struggle feeling it's just to have a billionaire coexist with people that are hungry on the streets. And that juxtaposition, definitely creates some tugs at the heartstring and things and makes us evaluate, is this a good principle? Is it not? Is there a better balance to this? Is there not? And those are some of the things that we'll try and explore honestly to look at to say, certainly I think the right to property led to America being incredibly wealthy like it is and prosperous. Does that mean that there's no pushback, or does that mean it's perfectly balanced? Are there things that have thrown that off? Because even, and this will be a fun one to explore, but as an attorney, it's very apparent to me that in the way that we create corporations and limited liability companies and things, we have thrown off some of that balance of rights and responsibilities. And it does lead to some perverse incentives and some situations that create wealth that may not always be just and appropriate to really strike that balance. And so simply because we talk about some of these things, it doesn't mean we're going to advocate that nothing in America needs to change or that everything's perfect. What we're trying to talk about is, at a basic level, the right to property versus what used to exist, where it was just kind of the king's. The king could do whatever he wanted with it. Really was a notion that started to change some things. And once the world saw what the Constitution did for America, people around the world wanted it. Some people have referred to the Constitution as America's greatest export because people could see that that type of structure would help to create a better scenario for them. And we're not talking about just money, but we're talking about, again, the ability to decide for yourself, the ability to direct your own life, the ability to do things. And so there were civil wars fought, there were things fought, and as a result of America conquering in the Revolutionary War, putting together the Constitution, kings fell. Kingships, queens around the world fell to this better way. And the world now has become intensely prosperous as they've worked together. To your point about addressing poverty, we can now hold in our hand, if you look at something like a cell phone here, that phone has hundreds of millions of dollars of research and development and technological costs and human capital that went into creating it. I remember watching a little documentary on NASA. They wanted to go to an asteroid. I don't even remember fully what their point was. They wanted to land. I think it was they wanted to actually land a spacecraft on an asteroid. And so they're showing, when they accomplished it, they landed it on this asteroid. But they were showing the video footage of it coming in. It's really grainy. And they made the comment in there that NASA spent something around $100 million to develop the digital camera sufficient to even capture the images it was. But by the time that camera or that satellite made it to the asteroid, technology, people on their smartphones had cameras that were 15 times as powerful. And so we look at all the things our smartphones do now. They're GPS systems. We used to pay thousands of dollars for a GPS system alone. They do email, they do communications, they do phone, they do banking. They do just so many things, and it all sits there for incredibly low cost. And so when you look at poverty and you look at these things, you think, wow. And obviously, a phone doesn't feed people alone. There's more to life than having a phone. Um, but as humans, as a human race, what we consider to be poverty now is very different than what it was back in the colonial times or back in Laura Ingalls Wilder times. Um, and it's just one of the things that we'll consistently refer back to is how did this principle shape it? And so to do that, we'll go through and we'll try and do weekly discussions. We'll focus on a societal issue or a legal issue and really try and frame it in light of some numbers, some facts, some situations. Try and show private things going on, legal things going on, public things going on, and try and present an approach. And we'll try very hard to show the flip side of things and talk about that. Because certainly everything hasn't been beautiful in America. But one of the most amazing pieces of America to me, the takeaways, is that the system created was strong enough to overcome things and moral evils, even as deep as slavery. Slavery was a true moral evil, but America overcame it. And that's something that the system pushed people to do, I believe. And I believe that if we keep our current system, the good principles and the appropriate things, it'll push us to solve a lot of the issues of our day and stay together. And I believe strongly there's much more strength in America being a land of intense, widespread opinions, types of people. It's a melting pot. The term today would be diversity. But America's always been a place where people of intense conflict could coexist somehow. And that intensity and conflict fueled some incredible progress. I actually think it's one of the things that fueled progress was the intense conflict that's existed, but a system that was able to manage it. And so I believe strongly that we each have views and opinions because we're keyed into something. Doesn't mean we're always right about everything. Doesn't mean I'm right. I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm changing my opinions. But these are pieces that shape us as America, as a country, and make us better.
Yeah, and along those same lines, I think too often today we like to point out faults in other people or other programs. And I think the better question should always be when we look at America is what has caused it to be different? The faults are common among all humankind throughout history. Slavery being the example you brought up, that was just the rule for all of human history until very recently in the West. And so the question isn't why did America participate in slavery? That's easy. That was the status quo. The question is what made us stop? What made people willing to sacrifice their lives to stop it? You can look at America for that in the Civil War. You can look at Great Britain and all the work they did while they were trying to rid the world of slavery. They were patrolling the seas with their massive navy, and they were stopping slavery ships from all kinds of different countries. And they were losing sailors left and right in this battle. And the question we have to ask is why did they decide to go down that route when the world had always been this way? What makes America different is why we decided to do things differently than have been done in the past. Why can in America we have so much diversity, as you point out, and yet live so in such relative harmony? There are other areas of the world that have far less diversity than America, specifically some places in Europe, such as France, and they really struggle with any of the diversity that they have. But America seems to gain a lot of strength from it. There's our motto as a country, E pluribus unum, out of many one, right? I don't think it's saying we're all going to be a homogenous group of people, but out of many people, we form one strong country. We have some sort of underlying principle that I think if we can identify, put our finger on, that we'll realize, oh, we are one. We're working towards something while being very different people, we all have something in common. And that's, I think, kind of the case we're making. What is that? What is that special sauce?
Yeah. And so we are excited to go through this, to start to key into some of these things. And again, similar to a trial, you'll hear witness, witness, you'll see exhibit, you'll see different things. The jury has to piece things together over a time period. There's not one direct answer. And just like in a trial, um, we'll be honest that at the end of the day, the conclusions you draw will be formed based on what you believe. No matter the numbers, no matter the data, no matter the legal arguments, no matter all the evidence we have currently, all the internet that records so many things to prove exactly why something happens or doesn't happen, that's not possible because we're talking about humans. We're talking about people that, to your point, why did the Britons go and try and rid the world of slavery? Why would they sacrifice people in their navy to do that? That is a question that people have lots of answers to. But our hope is through highlighting situation after situation, different scenario after different scenario, we can at least articulate the reasons we believe it, make a case for it, and then let you, after being able to see some of these things, discuss some of these things, review some of these things, to draw a conclusion about what it is that makes America special, what makes it worth believing in. Because as I look at it and I look at the life I have, I see a lot of gratitude. I feel grateful for those that went before, for the sacrifices made. And I think I have something here. There's something that others don't. And so I want to work to articulate it, want to work to teach that to others. And Michael and I certainly appreciate you guys being along for the ride. Certainly feel free to submit questions, comments. If we say something wrong, non-factual, we want to own that, to point things out. And again, we're humans, so we don't pretend to be infallible. But this is an area of great passion to us. And I do believe that with our different backgrounds, both in law and in data and numbers, we can present some very interesting and appropriate narratives. And one of the things we'll try very hard to do is we have a few rules of conduct on our show. We don't want to put down any group or people or person. We aren't here to call names. We aren't here to speak about being better than or anything like that. We will certainly talk about whether ideas are good or bad, whether they're bringing about the desired results or not, where some of those things go, but never in a sense of judging a person. So if that comes across, that's wrong. Don't call us out on it. But we don't want to judge for what people try, because we believe that one of the things that motivates people is we try and do our best. People try and do their best based on the knowledge and the understanding they have. And sometimes we don't know these things until we've seen them in action for a time. We learn things through experience. And so we don't permit name calling. We want to be civil and respectful, but we also want to be very open to the hard discussions, to talk about the things, to talk about both sides of an issue, just like you'd have in a trial where you get to see both sides argued and articulated. And so that is something that we will ask of all people, whether you're commenting, if you ever participate on the show, that you follow the same rules. We're talking about humanity here. These are people, and people try to do good for the most part. There are some exceptions to that for sure. But for the most part in America, we're blessed with very good people. And again, as a nation, there's something special there. And part of what's special is America's ability to look past some of those issues and connect at a more deeper human level. And that's something we hope to carry with us into the show, is that spirit of America that says e pluribus unum. So again, thanks for listening to this introduction. Please feel free to comment. Let us know if there's topics you want to talk about, to focus on. We have a general overview of how we'll go through things, but that can be changed based on if there's interest or any of that as well. But we appreciate your time, and we will plan on connecting with you again later. Thank you.